Hello, today we are propagating and pruning our tomato plants. And first I'm going to show you how we like to propagate our tomatoes. And I find this to be the best way to propagate tomatoes in order to get big bushy plants, because sometimes when you propagate tomatoes through suckers, you'll get these really leggy plants that produce, but they don't really produce very much. Well, I'm going to show you how to get around that. My first tip is to select suckers that are really small. You want to make sure that the stem of the sucker is under 2 inches. The reason you want to do this is because if you pick the longer suckers, they're kind of leggy because they're trying to reach out to get some sunshine from underneath all of those arms of leaves. So you want to pick one that is 2 inches or smaller, and they could be super tiny and they will still root and propagate. This one is a little too big, but would do fine if you wanted to propagate them. It will still end up being a little bit leggy, but that first sucker that I showed you is the perfect size. That size and smaller are the prime sizes for propagating. Check this out. You see all those little hairs in your tomato plants? Those are called trichomes, and there's 2 different types. There's your regular trichomes and then your nodular trichomes. The nodular trichomes secrete this essential oil that's kind of sticky like a tar, and it helps them defend themselves against certain bugs. So sometimes you might see bugs stuck to these little hairs, and that's why. Once you've got all your suckers picked out, you're going to put them in little peat pots, or you could put them in little seed starting trays with some coconut coir, and you just want to keep them damp for a couple of weeks before they're ready to plant. I also keep my propagated cuttings in full sun. I just make sure again that I'm keeping this moist. And the plants have already been in full sun, so there's no reason that you shouldn't be keeping these in the sun. They may wilt for the first day, but they should be fine. And here are some that I just propagated last week, and they're doing very well, and I keep these in full sun as well. Now this is a seedling. It's not a propagated cutting, but sometimes I'll put more than one seed in my pods, and when I do and I get 2 healthy plants like this, it's always hurts me to pluck one and not do anything with it. So I also repot these, and they do exceptionally well. So now you don't have to waste any seedlings when you multi-sow. Once you've noticed a significant amount of growth in your seedlings or in your propagated cuttings, you can plant them out in the garden. That means they've rooted and they're doing well. Here's some of that tomato tar on my fingers from handling the plants.
Alright, today we're gonna go through and prune up our tomato plants, and we're gonna go about 5 inches up. We're trying to get all the leaves off the ground. That way we don't get a lot of pests and disease. So it's just good to have better airflow. And also we're gonna prune off all the suckers. Alright, the thing that we're gonna prune off is the all the lower leaves coming off, and then also the suckers. If you look here, you'll see this would be like the arm of the plant, and this is kind of like, they call it the armpit, and you'll have suckers that come off. This is actually a big sucker that we probably should have cut off earlier, but we didn't catch it, so I don't really want to cut it at this point and leave a big part of the plant exposed. So I'm going to leave it for now because it is flowering, and we can still use it.
It'll just be 2 main stems.
See, here's a good example of a sucker. I'm going to get rid of that one. All right, while I'm in here too, I'll weed everything around the plant while I'm here. I'll go one more up. Eventually we'll prune about 10 inches up, so it'll be a lot more airflow at the bottom. And the reason we're gonna do 10 inches is because when this plant gets bigger, these leaves will actually grow longer and want to touch the ground, and we don't want anything to touch the ground. Also, if you look here, there's a sucker here. I'm actually gonna leave this one because next week when we come through, we're gonna take suckers off and propagate them. So then we'll have another set of tomatoes ready in a few weeks.
So when you prune your plants, you want to make sure that you don't just drop whatever you prune next to the plant and leave it there, because that's going to attract pests that you don't want on your plants. Things like roly-polies and stuff that eats decaying foliage, because anything that eats decaying foliage is also going to eat young foliage. And because these are young plants and you've got young seedlings in your garden, you don't want to attract any of that stuff into your garden. So just collect it in a bucket like Garrett's doing and compost it, and you can feed it back to your plants that way instead of just leaving them at the base of the plant.
So here's an example of a leaf that's touched the ground. It's collected water, maybe sat in water, or had bugs, nibble at it. So we want to make sure we get rid of all this decaying, nasty. Another thing to keep in mind is it's the middle of April, and you want to get out here and do this sooner rather than later, because the mosquitoes aren't quite out yet, and June bugs aren't out. So you want to get out and do all this hard work before all the bugs start messing with you. This is actually one of my favorite things to do. Come out here and prune these and make them look the way you want to, the structure. And it also allows you to get in close to the plant so you can see if there's any sort of insects or pests. I just found some sort of, look like a caterpillar. What is that called, a cocoon?
No, that's a caterpillar.
It was a caterpillar. It looked like
it wasn't a horned caterpillar like we're used to seeing. It was something else.
Yeah, but I got that off, and yeah, you can get in close and personal, weed, do it all in one shot, and then come back a few weeks later and do it again. That way you're not doing something every single day to them. You can plan around it. So if you'll notice too, I'm using some long scissors. That way I don't have to get in here and really touch the plant too much. If I do touch it, it's gonna be a part that's coming off the plant, because you don't want to get in here and mess with the all the trichomes, the little hairs, because those act as a pest deterrent. It's like a defense mechanism for the plant. You don't want to disturb those. Another thing to be careful with is we don't want to nick the main stem, or we don't want to scrape it and damage it. So I make sure the blades are always parallel with the stem and cutting away from the plant. You don't want to cut into it. When you're pruning your tomatoes, make sure that you're doing it in a day where it's going to be dry for that day and the next couple days. That way the plant has time to scar over and heal. When it's wet, it won't be able to do that. Similar to a scar or a scratch or something that you have on yourself. You gotta let it scab over. All right, so anytime I put green in the compost, anything that's green, I always put some brown also. And that helps with the composting process. And then also we'll put some water in here because it looks a little dry.